In the far reaches of the Arizona Territory, where the land stretched endlessly under a sun that seemed determined to burn memory itself into the soil, there lived a farmer named Eli Grayson, a man whose life had narrowed over the years into a routine of breathing dust, counting seasons, and speaking to no one but the wind. For Eli had lived alone for so long that even loneliness had become familiar, almost gentle in its cruelty, and the wooden farmhouse he had built with his own hands stood like a stubborn witness to a life shaped by loss, because years earlier his wife and infant son had died during a fever outbreak that swept through the scattered settlements, leaving behind empty rooms, a cracked cradle, and a man who learned to survive by burying his feelings as deep as he planted his crops. The neighbors, few and distant, whispered that Eli was cursed or broken, a man who no longer belonged to the living world but simply occupied it. Yet he worked from dawn until nightfall, growing corn and beans, raising a few cattle, trading quietly in town without lingering, and returning before dark as if afraid of human voices might reopen wounds he had carefully stitched shut with silence. And it was during one such rare trip into town, on a blistering afternoon thick with the smell of sweat and horse manure, that Eli's fate veered sharply from the narrow path he had walked for nearly a decade. For in the dusty yard behind the trading post, half hidden from the street, stood a small crowd gathered around a crude wooden platform, and on it, guarded by two men with rifles and cruel amusement in their eyes, stood a woman bound at the wrists, her dark hair tangled, her face bruised yet unbowed, her posture carrying a dignity that no rope could erase, and someone muttered that she was the last Apache woman taken from a broken band, captured after the army burned their camp, her people killed or scattered, and now being sold like livestock to whoever would pay, because no one wanted the trouble of an Apache except as a servant or a curiosity. And Eli, who had not intended to stop, felt something stir in his chest. Anger, perhaps, or recognition of another soul abandoned by the world. And before he fully understood why, he asked the price, his voice rough from disuse, causing several men to laugh. For what use would a silent farmer have for an Apache woman? But Eli paid anyway, handing over nearly all the money he had saved over years of careful living, ignoring the warning looks and the muttered predictions of bloodshed. And when the rope was cut and the woman was pushed toward him, she did not thank him nor plead. She simply looked at him with eyes that had seen death and betrayal too many times to trust kindness. And Eli led her to his wagon in silence, aware of the weight of every stare burning into his back, the road home long and empty, broken only by the creak of wheels and the distant cry of a hawk. And when they arrived at the farm, Eli untied her wrists and stepped back, pointing to the house and then to the well, offering gestures instead of words, because he did not know her language and barely remembered how to speak his own feelings. And for days they lived like ghosts sharing the same haunted space, she moving cautiously, always alert, expecting violence, while Eli kept his distance, sleeping in the barn at first, leaving food where she could take it without fear. And gradually the sharp edge of her vigilance softened, though never fully disappeared, and he learned her name was Naya. Not from her lips but from a symbol she carved into a piece of wood one night by the fire. And as weeks passed, the farm changed in subtle ways, her knowledge of the land transforming his struggling fields, teaching him when to plant by the moon, how to listen to the soil, how to see signs he had long ignored. And though they still spoke little, an understanding grew in shared labor and long evenings by the hearth, where stories were told not with words but with scars, glances, and quiet endurance. Yet the past, like the desert itself, does not forgive those who try to forget it, and rumors began to travel, carried by traders and drifters, that an Apache woman lived on Grayson's land, and soon trouble followed, first in the form of a group of men claiming she was government property, then others seeking bounty or revenge, and Eli, who had never fired a gun at another man, found himself standing between Naya and the world, discovering that love, once awakened, is far more dangerous than loneliness, and the first attack came at night, shots tearing through the dark, fire licking the edges of the barn, and Naya fought like a storm unleashed, moving with lethal grace, saving Eli's life when a man lunged from the shadows, and in that moment, the balance between them shifted, no longer buyer and bought, rescuer and rescued, but two survivors bound by choice, and after burying the dead attackers at dawn, Naya finally spoke in broken English, telling Eli the truth he had not dared to ask. That she had been promised to a white traitor under threat of massacre, that her people's spirits cried for justice, and that staying with him would only bring more blood. Yet Eli, his voice steady despite fear, told her she was free to leave, that he would never cage her, and the choice, he said, was hers alone, and Naya, after a long silence, chose to stay. Not because she owed him, but because she saw in him a man who had lost everything yet still chose mercy, and as seasons turned, their bond deepened into something fierce and tender, love born not of romance but of shared survival, and the land itself seemed to respond, crops thriving, the house filling with warmth, laughter slowly returning in hesitant moments, until one day a cavalry unit arrived, led by a captain who recognized Naya and revealed the final twist of fate. That Naya was not merely the last of her band but the daughter of a respected Apache leader whose death had been falsely blamed on settlers to justify extermination, and her existence threatened the official narrative of victory, making her a living truth the government wanted erased, and Eli was offered land, money, safety, if he handed her over quietly, but Eli, standing where his life had begun again, refused, choosing love over survival, truth over comfort, and when the soldiers advanced, Naya stepped forward, not to flee, but to speak, her words carrying the weight of history, exposing lies, naming atrocities, her voice shaking yet unbroken, and something unexpected happened, for not all men were monsters, and one soldier lowered his rifle, then another, until the captain stood alone, defeated not by force but by truth, and the unit withdrew, leaving behind a silence thicker than gun smoke, and in the years that followed, Eli and Naya lived not in hiding but in quiet defiance, their farm becoming a place of refuge, where forgotten people passed through, where stories were preserved instead of buried, and when Eli grew old, sitting on the porch watching the sun sink into the land that had once known only sorrow, he realized that buying Naya had never truly been the act that saved them both. It was the choice to see her as human, to stand beside her when it mattered, that rewrote both their destinies, and when history tried to forget them, the land remembered, whispering their story through the wind, a reminder that even in the wildest, cruelest corners of the West, humanity could still rise from the dust.